Before diving in, just a few words to explain to you what you may expect from today's lecture. It basically consists of two parts. In the first part, I'll give you a sampling, an incomplete overview of contemporary 21st century mermaid narrative, so that's a rather broad tour de l'horizon. And then in the second part, I will zoom in very closely on one specific children's novel, a novel by a Dutch author and illustrator. Her name is Annette Schaap. The novel is called Lampje, which translates as Little Lamp. It was published in 2018, and by now it has been translated into numerous languages. So I'm fairly confident that you'll be able to find a copy in your own mother tongue if I manage to raise your interest in this work, which I hope I will be able to do. So the second part is a piece of good old close reading, and I hope you'll have the patience to bear with me also during that second part. So here goes. I'll try and share my screen. And there we go. The feminist reputation of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale The Little Mermaid is rather poor, to put it mildly. Indeed, it is so very poor that some Danish activists felt compelled to vandalize the iconic statue of Andersen's mermaid in the harbor of Copenhagen. The poor creature was beheaded several times and even dumped into the water on various occasions. But the municipality of Copenhagen has insisted all throughout these attacks on keeping the statue in her proper place. The 1989 Disney adaptation of Andersen's tale, as well as its sequel from 2000, has not fared well in feminist criticism either. By and large, it is agreed that this movie perpetuates the curtailment of the mermaid that is so very typical of the Andersen version. Ariel, as she is now called, is tragically torn between longing and belonging. Once again, the mermaid has to sacrifice her beautiful voice, her means of expression, as well as her fishtail, the warrant of her freedom of movement, to enter into a love affair with a human male. In other words, cross-species romance goes at the expense of the non-human's agency. Andersen and Disney effectively tamed the once so very powerful and frightening water women of pre-modern myth and legend, such as the sirens in Homer's Odyssey. However, the mermaid has not been left to her tragic romantic fate. While the mermaid trope has been an enduring presence within Western cultural imaginaries from classical antiquity up to now, many of her 21st century embodiments differ distinctly from the Andersen and Disney narratives. Today, mermaids are making a splash all over the place in both older and newer media, ranging from print novels through feature films to online and on-site fan practices. Mermaid fan practices are indeed a rather bewildering phenomenon. Some of them are governed by teenage girls and stay rather close to Disney's Ariel, albeit that they focus on the first part of the narrative where Ariel manifests herself as a feisty, disobedient girl who challenges the patriarchal authority of her father. And never mind the rest of the story here. Cosplay workshops in learning how to swim with a mermaid tail, contests in mermaid swimming and mermaid costumes, often featuring on YouTube channels, are some examples of teenage aficionado cultures. If you want to read more about this, I can warmly recommend this edited volume to you. Quite a few online adaptations, however, take it further than that by queering the heteronormative love plot of Andersen and Disney, or by subverting the stereotypical outward appearance of the mermaid as tall, slender, long-haired, overwhelmingly Caucasian, and conventionally beautiful. In digital fan practices, for example, the border-crossing hybridity of the mermaid tends to be enlarged rather than downplayed through the tried and tested strategy of mashup. On websites such as Tumblr and DeviantArt, one may now admire, for example, Frankenstein mermaids, cyborg mermaids, zombie mermaids, or vampire mermaids. And if you want to read more about these creatures, you could visit the website of PhD candidate Martina Mussies. In other words, many fans project blatantly monstrous mermaids who are a far cry from the girly girl Ariel, whose fishtail bears a closer resemblance to a tight skirt than to a really fishy body part. Where film is concerned, the Polish movie The Lure provides us with a particularly striking example of this recent cultural tendency to release the monster in the mermaid. It features two sisters, called Silver and Golden, who are lured into leaving their watery element and entering the world of men by the seductive music of a rock band that's playing on the beach. One of them, Silver, the blonde-haired girl, goes down the path of Ariel, falling deeply in love with the bass player of the rock band and doing everything she can to adjust and assimilate to the human world just to win his favors. Silver even submits to surgery, but in the end, it is all for nothing, for a human lover can only see her as a less than perfect human. Silver eventually dies because of unrequited love. The other sister, Golden, however, moves into the opposite direction, categorically refusing to assimilate, freely indulging in her cannibalistic pleasure of eating men. Golden clearly displays features of the vampire mermaid. Eventually, she chooses to leave the world of humankind and to return to the sea after her sister's death. When the two adolescent mermaids come ashore at the beginning of the film, they are ignorant and innocent of the ruthlessly capitalist world that they are about to enter, which instrumentalizes everything and everybody just to make a profit. The Lure pictures the increasing masochism of Silver and the increasingly heartless cruelty of Golden as the tragic but inevitable effects of their socialization into late modern society. Society is cruel and callous in its exploitation of whomever one can exploit, and the coming of age processes of the two sisters are just the epiphenomena of the capitalist order. These are the only two options left to women, the movie suggests. But for one exceptional scene featuring a brief lesbian dalliance between Golden and a policewoman, which one might regard as a third option, presenting itself as a momentary flicker only. It is not only the narrative of the film that parts ways with the Disney mermaids, but also the very embodiment or visualization of silver and golden. In their pseudo-human form, the sisters are genital-less and bear a close resemblance to pre-pubescent girls. However, in their full mermaid shape, their fishtails are really something else, as you can already infer just by looking at this still. I have never seen a bigger nor a more fishy tail than the nether parts of these two, and they suggest enormous power, and it is clear that they cannot ever be made to really fit in. The lesbian love scene in the Lure is conversant with the queering of the heterosexual love plot of romantic mermaid tales that one comes across much more often in contemporary adaptations. Witness, for example, Maya Kern's webcomic, How to Be a Mermaid from 2010. You can find this on the website DeviantArt. And this comic pictures a love affair between a princess and a mermaid whose embodiment is also a far cry from the humanoid cuteness of Ariel. Whatever the medium in which contemporary mermaids are popping up, there is a significant effort going on to reinstall the awe-inducing powers which they so amply possessed in pre-modern myth and legend, thereby granting them the agency that they were so tragically deprived of in The Little Mermaid. The mermaid also pops up in more traditional media, such as children's print novels. This genre is not yet overly concerned with romance and sexuality, which affords at least some distance from the Andersen tale. In this free zone, the mermaid trope can be mobilized to project transgender or non-binary gender identities for young children. In the picture book, Julian is a mermaid, for example, we make our acquaintance with what at first sight seems to be a fairly non-ambiguous woman, a grandmother, and her likewise fairly straightforward grandson, Julian. It soon becomes apparent, however, that Julian inhabits a world between imagination and reality, populated by beautiful mermaid creatures who visualize Julian's desire to move beyond boyhood. He longs to become part of that world, so to speak. Therefore, Julian creatively transforms himself into a mermaid with the help of a few props, which one could interpret as his coming out as a transgender person. At first, his grandmother appears to be none too pleased, making Julian feel rather embarrassed, but she quickly changes her mind and supports Julian. Together, they take the next step as grandmother introduces Julian to a community of like-minded persons, all dressed up in the most fantastic outfits or costumes. They are all on their way to the sea, as you can tell, where they will be in their element, as the final spread suggests. This picture book is completely in line with the overwhelming popularity of mermaids with trans girls. And this popularity is probably sparked off by the high visibility of the US teen TV star Jazz Jennings. And if you want to read more about this, I can warmly recommend this book chapter by Nat Hurley to you. Radical as some of these reworkings may seem at first sight, in their insistence on granting agency to the misfits, they often are less than revolutionary on second thought. It is a well-known tenet of feminist theory that shifting the weight of power from one term of a binary opposition to another one does not necessarily deconstruct binarisms as such. And the subversive potential of the mermaid trope seems to reside in just that, in its invitation to reconsider and reimagine the relations between humans, animals, and the animate and inanimate phenomena that make up their habitats. Furthermore, many mermaid adaptations picture agency as an attribute that individuals may or may not possess. And as such, one could say they buy into the ideology of the autonomous human individual who should be capable of standing apart from everybody and everything else. And this view on agency reinstalls rather than destabilizes the boundaries between genders, humans and non-humans, nature and culture. We therefore need a conceptual and an aesthetic vocabulary that will enable us to think, imagine, picture, and narrate beyond the tried binarisms of culture versus nature, human versus non-human, male versus female, adult versus child, straight versus queer, white versus black, and so on. Where mermaid lore is concerned, Philip Hayward, expert in the folklore of island communities and author of a wonderful monograph on mermaids in 20th and 21st century media lore, offers a neologism that I find very helpful in this respect. According to Hayward, hybrid amphibious creatures, such as mermaids and mermen, are the manifestations par excellence of what he calls the aqua-pelagic imaginary. Hayward introduces the neologism of aqua-pelago as an alternative to the more familiar archipelago, because the latter is suggestive of the superiority of terrestrial over aquatic spaces in island communities, according to Hayward. In aqua-pelagic societies, seas are not just a place one traverses to get to land, but, I quote, a social unit existing in a location in which the aquatic spaces between and around a group of islands are utilized and navigated in a manner that is fundamentally interconnected with and essential to the social group's habitation of land and their senses of identity and belonging. End of quote. A second productive concept is offered by Ian Maxwell in response to Hayward's work, namely the concept of intercorporeality. The bodies of the inhabitants of aquapelagic spaces are characterized by what Maxwell calls a radical continuity with each other and with their shared habitat. Rather than being set against the world we inhabit, we are given through and with it. Groups that inhabit island spaces or coastal regions can become closely implicated in marine spaces as a result of their livelihood activities. And Maxwell exemplifies this as follows. Another quote. The seas are known, as are the lands, in and through processes of embodiment. They are felt, attuned to, personified, negotiated with, and incorporated as much as they are charted, quantified, and overcome. The sailor takes to land with the pitch and sand of sea in his or her legs, just as the weight and texture of the wind registers in the ache of muscles and coarsening of hands. The seas are lived in and through as much as they are traversed. End of quote. I find these two concepts of aquapelago and intercorporeality highly useful for exploring the full subversive potential of the mermaid trope to radically reconfigure relationships between humans and non-humans, and between nature and culture more broadly. And to this end, I would like to zoom in on the novel I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, Lampje by Annette Schaap, and my apologies for the unintended mirror effect in this illustration, the cover, and the novel is illustrated by Annette Schaap herself. This novel is vaguely backdated to a 19th century-ish period and set in an equally vaguely delineated coastal region that is easily recognizable for Dutch readers, but might just as well figure as the British, French, or Danish coast. The fact that Annette Schaap is a Dutch author is not an entirely contingent or meaningless fact in this case, for even though the Netherlands are not an island, they certainly were an aquapelagic community, if there ever was one, although in the past, much more so than in the present. Let me first summarize the plot before delving into the analysis. Lampje is a girl around 10 years old who lives with her widowed father in a lighthouse on a small peninsula. The peninsula bay has an awkward rock sitting right in its midst, making the harbor behind it difficult to reach. Lampje's father has taken to drinking after her mother passed away, so now it's basically up to her to climb the 61 steps towards the top of the lighthouse to light its fire so ships won't be wrecked on the rock in the midst of the bay. A heavy duty for a small child. One stormy night, Lampje fails to light the fire and disaster strikes immediately in the form of a shipwreck. Now, townspeople intervene in their small household, imprisoning Lampje's negligent father and placing Lampje in custody in a big Gothic mansion called the Black House. The owner of the Black House, a high-ranking Navy officer, is away on one of his many sea voyages, leaving his estate to the housekeeper, Martha, who lives there with her retarded son, Lenny, and a handyman called Nick. This typically Gothic mansion also has its mad woman in the attic, hidden away behind closed doors, albeit that Lampje finds out that the monster upstairs is not a woman, but a boy, half human, half fish. So the mermaid is a mer-boy here, carrying the lofty name of Edward Robert George Evans, after his father, the Admiral. He is the offspring of a love affair between the Admiral and a mermaid, who took to the sea after giving birth to Edward, leaving him to fend for himself, just like Lampje was left to her own devices after her mother's death. The Admiral has given strict orders that Edward needs to overcome his base, fishy tendencies and practice daily to stand upright and walk with the help of a harness. Clearly, his father, the Admiral, firmly believes in the power of mind over matter and hopes to eventually have a proper son in Edward one day. The novel narrates how Lampje and Edward gradually get to know and accept each other. By and by, they learn to help each other out of their marginalized, powerless positions. Edward shares the fruits of his high educational levels with illiterate Lampje, teaching her how to read and write. And Lampje, in her turn, assists Edward in the discovery and exploration of his true element, water, by transporting him out of his attic room for a few exploratory dives in the garden pond. And later, and that's the scene you see in this illustration, she even smuggles him out of the estate in a cart constructed especially for the purpose by handyman Nick, so Edward can further explore his aquatic competencies in the sea. In the meantime, Lampje also puts her newly acquired writing skills to good use by writing to her father, saving him from the gallows, which would have been his punishment for the neglect of his lighthouse duties. Eventually, Lampje and Edward escape together from the Black House by jumping out of the sea-facing window of Edward's attic room, and together with Lampje's father, they take to the sea on the former pirate ship of Lampje's dad. The ship is called the Black Am, named after and magically reincarnated his deceased wife, Emilia. And Edward swims out to sea to go and search for his mother. So far, so good where the plot is concerned, but there's a whole lot more going on in this novel than a mere summary could suggest. The fascination and the beauty of this novel resides in the way in which Annette Schaap has woven a dense tapestry of affinities around the humans, animals, and inanimate objects that constitute Lampje's world. Through their numerous resonances and resemblances, they constitute one undivided, closely coherent universe in which everything hangs together with everything and everybody. I cannot analyze this rich tapestry exhaustively here, but let me just present you with a few telltale examples, doing a bit of good old close reading. Take the issue of legs, for example, a prominent feature of every mermaid story. Initially, Edward has an issue with legs, leading the life of a cripple who can only stand upright by donning a harness, and even then he is still incapable of putting one foot in front of another, simply because he doesn't have any. But Edward is definitely not the only character in the novel to be challenged by his neither parts. So does Lampje's father, who used to be a pirate before he struck land as a lighthouse keeper. In true pirate fashion, he misses half a leg, which he lost in a duel over Lampje's mother, Emilia, nicknamed Black Emilia, or Black Am, because of her raven black hair. Talking of Lampje's mother, she also had a thing with legs. When she fell ill before her death, she first lost her voice, we are told, and then the use of her legs, which suggests an affinity of sorts with Edward's mermaid mother. Edward's mother traveled after the admiral she had fallen in love with to present herself to him on land, sporting a fine pair of legs, which soon became increasingly invalid as she was trapped inside the admiral's household. Edward's mom ended her miserable existence on land by jumping out of the attic window straight into the sea, just like Lampje and Edward would do later on. To top it all off, even the admiral, who personifies Western rationality, discipline, regimentation, and the subjection of nature here, even he has a thing with legs, in that he nearly lost one of his to gangrene. Refusing amputation, however, the admiral pushed back the gangrene in his infected leg through sheer force of willpower, as a triumph of mind over matter. Clearly then, in the aquapelagic space of Lampje's habitat, humans and merfolk constitute a closely knit continuum, but this continuum stretches out even further, also including inanimate matter, which is one I want to talk about a bit now. Lampje, whose real name is Emilia, after her mother, is perfectly content with also being named after the lamp she has to light every evening, and after the lamp that is standing on her bedstand, a lamp made out of green enamel decorated with a gold rim. These colors point to mermaids in this novel, whose hair is green and whose black eyes lighten up in golden flames as they enter water. Wood and stones also form part of this continuum. The mutilated leg of Lampje's father is fitted out with a wooden prosthesis, which enables him to move around. And the dogs at the Black House, that have a very close relationship with Lenny, the retarded son of the housekeeper, if you're still with me, they are called Douglas, and Logwood, another link between animate and inanimate matter. The novel also plays with proverbial meanings of wood. If you want to emphasize the moral integrity and reliability of a person, you can say in Dutch that that person is cut out of the right wood. Edward dreams that his father, the admiral, will one day grant him this honorific epithet. The last part of the novel, part 6, is called Heldenhout, hero wood, the sort of wood that heroes are cut out of. This expression acquires a broad range of references in the 6th part. Edward generously confers the compliments that he so desperately desired to receive from his father to his friend Emilia, as they are about to make their leap to freedom from the attic window that looks out of the sea. I don't dare to jump, Emilia says, but Edward tells her that she will manage, since she has been cut out of the right sort of wood, which he calls hero wood. But the expression may also apply to the wooden rowing boat crafted by handyman Nick that Emilia and Edward use as a means of transport to the lighthouse after their jump, or to the wood that the pirate ship, the Black M, has been built out of. A signifier that ties all other floating signifiers together. In the first instance, M is an abbreviation of Emilia, Lampje's mother, but M is also the first letter of mermaid, man, monster, mast, misthorn, or mother. Last but not least, to round off my sampling of the numerous resonances in this novel, a word about rocks. Nothing but a narrow rock path connects the peninsula of the lighthouse to the civilized world of the harbour town. During high tide, the rock path is sticking out just like a row of teeth, the opening of the novel suggests, and this is reminiscent of the sharp teeth that merfolk are often credited with in mermaid lore. Edward also has very sharp teeth, that he uses to bite Martha and Lampje on their first encounter. More importantly, there's the rock sitting in the midst of the bay in front of the harbor. This rock figures prominently in Lampje's imagination and life as a cause of both life and death. It is the type of rock that mermaids like to sit on while looking into a mirror and combing their hair. It's the rock that causes the shipwreck that almost becomes the undoing of Lampje's father. At the same time, however, the rock is also a lifesaver. Lampje nearly drowns twice in her life, and twice she is saved by being lifted up to this rock, by helpful mermaids, of course. If even a lethal rock has its saving grace, then surely there is also a glimmer of hope for the admiral who remains behind all alone at the end of the novel, and who is almost as hard, as tough as a rock, but perhaps not quite, given his weak spot for a mermaid, as there are no stark oppositions between good guys and bad guys, nor between good girls and bad girls, in this very generous, forgiving novel. Indeed, there are no fixed oppositions at all here. Clearly then, Lampje lives in a fully animated universe. The wind speaks to her, her deceased mother speaks to her. She finds communion in basically everything and everyone. Thanks to Edward's lessons, her communicative skills are eventually crowned by the magic arts of reading and writing, with inanimate letters putting living creatures into contact with each other. Unlike many other contemporary mermaid narratives, Annette Schaap is not explicitly concerned with deconstructing heteronormative romance. Given the fact that the two leading characters are two preteen children, love plots do not form a focal point here. Rather, Annette Schaap digs just a little bit deeper by cutting at the root of the binary system, namely the heavily gendered opposition between humans and non-humans, or between nature and culture. The concept of intercorporeality helps to understand what this innovative mobilization of the mermaid trope is about. Humans, objects, animals, and hybrid creatures are shown to exert a shaping influence on each other, inhabiting each other's bodies and generating synergies that help to overcome adversity and isolation and to generate a sense of belonging in a specific place. Once this continuum between humans and more than humans has been established, other social markers become fluid as well. Gender binaries lose their rigidity as becomes manifest in the exchange of male and female attributes between Edward and Emilia, while ability and disability become fully relative to the habitat one is consigned to. On dry land, Edward is a cripple. In the sea, he is an acrobat. Same thing for Emilia. In the civilized world of the town, she is a misfit, neglected and abandoned. But she finds community in the Black House and on the Black M. Everyone has a proper element somewhere, Annette Schaap suggests, and we depend on each other's support in our quests to find it. To conclude, a few general observations that may be inferred from the case of contemporary mermaid lore. Disney's Ariel is consumed by her desire to become part of the human world. Contemporary mermaid adaptations suggest that it is rather the other way around nowadays. humans desire to become part of the mermaid world, projecting the world of the sea as being free from the strictures of ableism, narrowly defined beauty ideals, heteronormativity, and gender binaries. Intercorporeality means that humans realize that they do not stand over, above, and against nature, but that their embodied existence forms an integral part of the natural habitat that enables their life in the first place. Secondly, intercorporeality implies that agency is not an exclusive attribute of human individuals that one may acquire or lose, but rather agency emerges from interactions between humans and their more than human surroundings. Annette Schaap's novel pictures such a fully interconnected world. The hybrid embodiment of mermaids, or merfolk, speaks so very strongly to the 21st century imagination, I think, 21st century Western imagination, because of our preoccupation with gender fluidity, but also, and related to that, with the pressing ecological need to fundamentally reconsider and reenact the place of humans in the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this fascinating lecture. It was really insightful and very thought-provoking. So I'm sure that there will be many questions and many comments. I have some, but let's wait and see if there are some questions from our attendees. So please remember that you can just ask your question out loud, or you can post it in the meeting chat. Okay, Basha, you have a question, please go ahead. And then Carla. So Basha and then Carla.
Thank you very much, Liz, for this wonderful lecture. I was wondering, because Annette Schaap is in the first place illustrator, how do the illustrations contribute to your interpretation? Maybe you could say some words, because we have seen some illustration in your presentation, but I was wondering what's your interpretation of the illustrations?
Yeah, so the illustrations you saw in my PowerPoint are all of the bigger illustrations that occupy 2 pages, a full spread. And one of the things that is very remarkable about these illustrations is the very tiny place of humans. So in all of the spreads I showed, well, it's very easy to overlook human beings even. So the last spread with Edward and Emilia escaping from the garden of the estate with Edward sitting in a small cart because he can't walk. If you first look at the illustration, it's very easy not to notice them at all. And the picture of the black house doesn't contain any references to human creatures. In the first spread, you see Emilia or Lampje being pulled away from her dad, and those 2 human figures are situated at the bottom right of the page, almost falling off, one could say. So that's one of the things that I find striking about the illustrations, the non-central place of humans.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting observation. Carla has a question. So Carla, please go ahead.
Hello. Sorry, I can't turn the webcam on right now, but thank you so much for this very interesting talk. And I hope I didn't miss this, but I feel like that mermaids have been taken up more by younger children. Like you mentioned that mermaids, people have drawn mermaids as vampires and zombies, and I think those kind of like mythical creatures have been taken up quite a lot in YA, but I feel like mermaids have been always catered more to younger children and younger audience. So I was wondering what you think, that if that might be a connection to the Ariel, the Disney film, because I know my young cousins, they're one of the people who have this mermaid tail and had these swim lessons, and they're like 7 or 8. So I just was wondering if you think there is a trend of having mermaids being more something that caters to younger children, and whether that may be something because they are a bit more, at least in the Disney version, a bit less harmful and quite friendly creatures.
Yeah, thank you for your question. One of the things that I find very striking about the presence of mermaid narratives in contemporary popular culture is their omnipresence. So they are omnipresent in children's novels, in young adult novels, in films that obviously cater to an adult audience, such as The Lure and countless other movies. The only place where I haven't really seen all that much of them, but that might be my lack of knowledge, is in novels, in literature, capital L, so to speak. But where popular culture is concerned, the fascination with mermaids is not restricted to a particular age group. They are all over the place, I would say, as far as I can tell, which I find very interesting because it suggests that the world of children's fiction is, a seamless whole, as it were, with popular culture more broadly. I hope I've answered your question, Carla. Otherwise, you...
Yes, thank you. Maybe I'm just reading the wrong stuff, but I always just, had this idea that like vampires and like zombies are maybe more a bit for older children and the mermaids. But maybe I'm just wrong. So it was interesting hearing your thoughts on that. Thank you.
We have another question by Julia. Julia, please go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for that talk. That was really interesting. I'm wondering if in your sort of survey of mermaid creatures, come across any specifics about the actual like fish part of the mermaid, because like I haven't really like looked into this, but the mermaids that I've encountered are all sort of like pseudo fish. Like they just have a fish tail, but the human part is quite expanded. That's what the story is. But yeah, I was just wondering if you came across any specifics about the fish aspects.
Yeah. It depends what you mean by the fish aspect. Where mermaids and gender identities are concerned, the interesting aspect of mermaids and merfolk is, of course, that they don't have genitalia. Or at least they don't have fixed genitalia. And that makes them a productive fantasy place where you can imagine and visualize gender identities beyond male and female. And the mermaid narratives I've come across are often more concerned with that aspect of their fishtail, which means they don't really have genitalia, than with their life in the sea. But there are significant exceptions. So, for instance, the web comic I mentioned by Maya Kern, How to Become a Mermaid. The mermaid in that comic is very, very animal-like, resembles much more an animal than a human being. And she also does not leave the sea at all. Nowhere in the story does she come out of the sea. So everything that happens underwater. That's a remarkable thing. Annette Schaap's novel, which I'm a little bit obsessed with maybe right now, or I'll get over that in due time. Annette Schaap's novel is also remarkable in the beautiful descriptions of the joy Edward experiences when he is finally allowed to enter into water. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I was, so it sounds like, because my specific interest was in finding details about the diversity of the fish, but it sounds like perhaps literature hasn't quite explored that area yet. So thanks to.
Yeah, the action tends to take place on land, which marginalizes their fish life, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This was a great question, I think. It was really thought-provoking. It made me rethink all of the narratives which I am familiar with, including some Polish ones, which probably you're not familiar with. So thank you, Julia, for this question. So do we have any other questions to our guest speaker? Maybe in the chat, but let me check the chat. I haven't noticed any questions. Okay, so I have a question then. So in your presentation, you mentioned this Polish film, The Lure, which I believe to be, as I've already said, quite interesting and quite problematic. But it's also one of the more, let's say, artistically interesting, let's say, Polish films of the last few years, and it also plays with this motif of sisterhood, two sister mermaids. And I'm not sure if you know, but according to one of the legends, the mermaid of Warsaw, so who is one of Warsaw's symbols, is the lost sister of the Little Mermaid. And there are many Polish books in which this motif of mermaid sisters is present, including Katarzyna Regil's Strażnik Klejnotu, a Polish book for children, which was published last year. And I've been wondering, are there any books maybe in the Netherlands or in other countries which also focus on this sisterhood between mermaids and the importance of collaboration, let's say, between mermaids, or maybe they're more focused on the individual, let's say, protagonist and their experiences?
One readily comes to my mind, a Dutch adaptation, which maybe Barbara also knows, because it's an adaptation, I think, from the 50s by a very highly respected Dutch poetess, Vazalis. And she wrote an opera libretto, which is a rewrite of Andersen's tale. And one of the main differences between her adaptation, Vazalis' adaptation, and the Andersen version is the enormous emphasis that Vazalis places on sisterhood and the various sisters. And these sisters become quite murderous, I would almost say, towards the end of the story, when the mermaid is presented with the option to either kill her human lover or die herself. And there's an absolutely enticing chorus of the sisters, very dramatic episode, when they urge her in unison, in beautiful Dutch poetry, I have to say, to kill him, which is a very remarkable scene. So you see a sort of female bonding going on between the sisters in an attempt to save the life of a sister who has gone astray in female masochism, one could say. So that's one example that comes readily to my mind. Do you know this opera, Barbara?
No, actually I don't. I know Vazalis, of course, very, very well, but only her poetry, but not this libretto. I can't remember. But this is really strange because she's rather she's approached as a rather conservative author.
But that view has been contested lately. And this is one of the texts that forms the basis for that contestation. Vazalis is not as conservative.
As the 50ers may thought, probably. The group of authors, of poets who thought she was very conservative, but it was not the truth. So, but I don't know if you know also this book Het Meisje van Mars, the slash rates. It was written in cooperation, an author and transgender girl, and there is also this mermaid motif, and there are also other mermaids, transgender mermaids. So this is also a kind of sample of Dutch literature, and also this popular genre, but it's for young adults. So this question about the group where this motive is more obvious, it's not so it's not restricted to the youngest, but in very it was in all these books where the transgenders are making their memories. They said that they were in the age of 2 or 3 when they started to think about mermaids. So I don't think they all knew then Ariel and Disney. So this is something really which is also very already probably research in the psychology.
Or ethnography, rather. I think this is the fascination of trans girls with mermaids is something that really invites ethnographic inquiry. So we should interview these girls and dig a bit deeper in their source of fascination in that way. I think that would be a really good step forward.
But I liked your interpretation of Lampie, and it puts the book in the broader context of anthropocentric tendencies in the literature, in children's and young adults literature nowadays, I think. What do you think?
Yes, so in critiques of anthropocentrism.
Yeah.
Very much so. I think that's the gist of the novel, and in my eyes, that's also the most interesting or fruitful exploration of the mermaid trope to explore new ways of relating to the natural world, if you like. That's, of course, a very old theme in ecofeminism. And so in Val Plumwood's book, for instance, Feminism and the Mastery of Nature, that all forms of discrimination are actually rooted in an instrumentalizing conceptualization of nature. And nature is only a resource. It's only imaginable as a resource for us to exploit. It doesn't have any agency of its own. It doesn't have any intrinsic value of its own. It's just a resource. And I would say that Annette Schaap's novel is part of a cultural movement that struggles towards conceptualizations of nature beyond the instrumentalizing view as a mere resource. And it speaks to children, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think adults struggle much more. Their minds are much more narrowly confined to this instrumentalizing view than children. Children, I don't want to romanticize them overly, but I do think children have a much more lively relationship with animals, for instance, than adults tend to have. So it makes sense to me that children's literature also engages profoundly in this critique of anthropocentrism. And yeah, that is so important in the environmental humanities.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this great answer. Thank you. We have two more questions. One is in the meeting chat. It's a question asked by our graduate student, Justina Mentrak. Thank you for your wonderful lecture. Are there any other books about boy mermaids that you know or would recommend? So that's the first question. So we can address this one.
Very good question. I can't be of much help to you because I think Annette Schaap's novel is a rather rare exception. And most of the time we are looking at mermaids. But what would be interesting is to first explore this question by delving into myth and legend. Because I know more examples of merfolk, men and women, in myth and legends than, especially in legends, come to think of it. That's where most of the examples I know of mermen or merboys are from legends. There's a very famous Dutch legend about a merman. Do I have the time to to recapitulate that legend? Or?
Yes, of course. Yes, we have a few minutes. Don't worry.
So, as you may know, a quarter of Dutch territory is 5 to 7 meters under sea level. And one of the consequences of that is that there are many drowned villages in the coastal region. So the province, one island of the province of Zeeland, which is called Schouwen, already has 15 drowned villages along its coast. And those drowned villages are closely tied in with all sorts of legends. And one of those legends is a legend about a merman. It starts with a mer family, actually, a mermaid, a merman, and a mer baby. And the proud and prosperous fishermen of a village called Westerschouwen accidentally catch the mermaid. And they refuse to return her to the sea, even though her husband, the merman, begs them to. And he follows their ships and enters the harbor for days on end with his child, begging the proud, that's how they are represented, begging the proud fishermen to please, please return my wife. And they don't. They make fun of her, they make do with her, and they don't care. And then in the end, the merman pronounces a curse on Westerschouwen. Westerschouwen, Westerschouwen, het zal u berouwen dat ge genomen hebt mijn vrouwen. Westerschouwen, you dearly regret that you took my wife. And then he says, you'll be covered underneath the sea waters, and only the church people will remain. And that's what happened to Westerschouwen, actually. So that's, I can mention examples from legends, in short, but not so much from fictional adaptations. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. This is a legend that I was not familiar with, so I'm very happy that you decided to share it with us, because I will never forget it. Really, a very memorable one. We have another question, this time by Evelyn. Evelyn, please go ahead.
Hi, Elise. Thank you for that talk. Actually, my question was partly to do with mermen, because they seem to be quite different in the sense that they're not trying to be something else. They're usually more powerful, and they just seem to be almost completely separate plots from the mermaids. I don't know if you've just talked about that a little bit, but they always seem to be like Poseidon. And I just remembered this book, Fish Girl, by David Wiesner. It's a graphic novel that came out about maybe 2 years ago. I mean, I don't think it's one of his best, but you might want to see if you can get it.
Yeah.
Fish Girl by David Wiesner and Donna Jo Napoli. So, and in this one, she's kind of in between. It's not very clear. Seems to be both mermaid, but also able to be human. I have to say, I don't remember the plot exactly because it's been a while since I read it. But I just thought it was interesting how the merman is that has the trident. He's Poseidon. He's powerful. He doesn't need to lose his, tail and get legs, for example. So it does seem to be quite a gendered image.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Which makes me think, looking at you, doesn't Scotland also have its own body of mermaid narratives? And they call it, what do they call it again?
Selkies.
Yeah,
Selkie.
Yeah.
Selkies.
They're the Selkies. Yeah.
Do men figure prominently amongst the Selkies?
I think it's usually a woman. I mean, I'm not very. I don't know the legends terribly well, but it's mostly women who it's usually a woman who's left her, or the man has taken her seal skin, and I think it's more seal than fish, but I have to say I don't really know. Someone in the audience might know better than I would. But there is that image too, also about the woman who's had to take off something or lose something to become human.
Yeah. So the fascinating thing about these hybrid water creatures or amphibious creatures is that I can't pretend to have much knowledge of these stories in other cultures, but everyone seems to agree that it's hard to find a culture that does not have this fantasy creature, almost up to the point that you begin to think they must have existed somewhere, sometime, because they are so ubiquitous in all myth and legends of, in Eastern and Japanese legends. They are everywhere. I'm not sure where this is leading us, Matthäus.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I've always found it really fascinating that when it comes to mermaids, when it comes to the Selkie, these are creatures which are always in between. They're never fully satisfied. They never fully belong. They're, even when they give up their tail and they get legs, they have to lose something, and they're never full. And even when it comes to the Selkie, if I remember the legend correctly, a woman who is a Selkie, from time to time, she has to return to the ocean. She cannot stay, for her entire life. There's a day when she just has to go and return to the ocean, even for a day, because she just cannot handle her reality. And I just find these creatures to be fascinating. So, and this in-betweenness. And I think that it can also be read from this gender perspective, definitely. So thank you for your really memorable and gripping lecture. I think that we all enjoyed it. And thank you for this great discussion. And I think that you made us think and rethink also the folk tales we know, we are familiar with, also the folk tales which we may have forgotten. And now we're slowly, I think, now starting to remember the ones we once knew. So thank you. And I think that all of us, every single time we'll come across an interesting mermaid narrative, we'll let you know. Yes. Yes.
I appreciate that. And thank you. It was my pleasure and honor to speak in this lovely series.